everyone, and welcome back to another very insightful episode of TeqTalk, where we explore the power of AI, data, and innovation with various industry leaders driving this transformation. Today, I'm honored to have Aseidas Blauvelt with us, a tech visionary with over 20 years of experience and a track record of leading global organizations as Chief Technology Officer. So, Aseidas, welcome to TeqTalk.
Great, thanks for having me here.
My pleasure. So let's start with your journey. You have worked across multiple global organizations and shaping technology strategies at the highest level, right? So would you like to talk something about your career, how you started and what exciting things you're doing now?
I'm sure. I've been working in tech for about 25 years. Some things kind of happened by accident, other things intentionally, but I've had the opportunity to work across a lot of different industries in the private sector, in the education sector, and in the nonprofit sector, a lot of that time in sub-Saharan Africa. And then in the last 3 years, I've been working with Vera Solutions, creating various technical solutions for the social impact sector, primarily on the Salesforce platform, which I've been focused on for the last about 10 years.
Yeah. That's inspiring. I mean, that's really good. You started your career 25 years back, right? That time, the technology was different and the landscape and the industries were different. Now it's completely different. So let's talk something about a tech leadership, right? So nowadays, it's not only about managing IT operations, it's also about driving business transformation, right? And without doing business transformation and innovation, it's very hard to survive in this whole industry and technology world. So what is your experience on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the technology role has shifted to more the front of house, where when I first started, it was kind of the servers were in a closet somewhere and the tech people were, close by feeding the server and making sure it was running, to, the boardrooms and making more strategic decisions and having to align technology with business value, and actually being now the driving force of innovation. I think tech leadership has shifted in that. I mean, I think my own journey, it's been a learning process. Where early in my career I didn't really argue too much. I didn't push back. I wasn't really thinking about business value as much. I was just really excited to solve big problems, and just the pleasure of solving hard problems. Whereas now, over the last, few years of my career, I've shifted to realizing that's the reason, and it is a shift, it is a shift to get away from like, okay, everyone's going to be really impressed if I talk about technology, or if I, or I think they're going to be impressed, but mostly I was just frustrating them, and figuring out how to speak to other exco members or speak to board members or investors about technology without it being intimidating and without using, complicated language that just, annoys people mostly. That's been a big shift. And that's kind of one of the things I tell my team is you have to, our senior developers, any developers, like learn how to straddle. If you want to move forward into a management role, you have to learn how to straddle both worlds, and you have to be very good operationally. You also have to have, be thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead, because every major tech decision you make is a long one. Usually, I mean, they're not easy to get out of. So you have to think very clearly and have a strategic mind rather than just short-term problem solving and doing cool stuff, which is also fun. But yeah, going from working in server rooms and tables and like the point is it used to be a lot harder to do these things. So you kind of had time to think about it and you needed to really analyze it before making huge strategic decisions. And, nowadays you just sign a DocuSign and click on some buttons and design something that is in someone else's server farm and you don't really need to worry about too much.
Yeah,
that kind of leads to maybe more space for strategic thinking, but also, it's a lot easier to make mistakes.
Yeah. I think I really like the point where you said that you should look into the business value when you're doing some kind of work, right? Any initiation should have, or any use case or POC must have a business value and the ROI defined. So, and also the leaders should also start looking into the revenue generation mindset kind of a thing instead of just cost center mindset, right? So what do you think are the biggest mistakes and challenges leaders are taking while trying to scale the transformation? So doing as a use case or POC, it's pretty simple. But when the time comes to elaborate and scale that transformation, most of the things stop there. So what do you think are the biggest mistakes leaders are taking while they're trying to scale their transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, this last part of my career has mainly been focused on the nonprofit sector. So I can kind of speak about that. Like working in cloud has been something I've mainly done in the nonprofit sector. So prior to that, I was, pre-cloud, let's say. So I think one mistake I've made myself is kind of these long-term, I guess putting all your eggs in one basket, working in the Salesforce ecosystem. Sometimes that happens just because it's easier, and sometimes because the integrations are there, the products are complementary. It does make sense to do so sometimes, but not having a strategy, worst case strategy, I think, trying to design solutions if they're not Salesforce solutions, but using some other cloud provider, multi-cloud solutions to give yourself some like flexibility is something I started thinking about a lot in my designs. Whereas in the past, it was like, you sign one contract, you get everything done. And then you find yourself stuck in a few year contract where it's not easy to back out of. Yeah. So that's a mistake I think I've made. And then in terms of resource allocation, obviously is a challenge. Resource allocation and estimation, those things are really kind of, tied together. And that's something that is a challenge, and it's still a challenge. Just having just the right amount of resources is something that's tough to do, because it's still estimation, especially, I think, not especially, but in the Salesforce ecosystem can be very challenging with complex solutions, because some things are so easy to do, so that's always a kind of balancing act that we face anyway. And then just maintaining your agility, I think, is a challenge. There's someone, having a really well-defined roadmap for your product and very good estimations and, the best planning. And you try to balance that with being agile to changes in the market or, in the world, which is, something we've all faced, I think. So there is a kind of somewhere in between being too agile, especially when you're a bit more established, when you're no longer in a startup space and you still want to have that kind of agile mentality and culture. But it's not, it's not that your product's more complex. You actually have customers now. You have to kind of, play both sides. So I find that really challenging, but also it's interesting. It's an interesting problem to solve. It's something we struggle with as well. And we're getting at. I think another thing that is challenging as you start scaling is the cross-functional collaboration, different roles. We've always seen, we get to a certain size. In the early 2000s, I was part of a lot of acquisitions, and the one small company gets acquired by another bigger company, another big one. You just keep drifting further away from the center, and it becomes harder and harder to maintain collaboration, and everybody becomes very compartmentalized. And within our team, we have to do it very intentionally, having our offices in Mumbai and in Brazil with the time shift, like a lot of companies, right? So yeah, I think that's really encouraged this collaboration and innovation. And we're working on some things now to kind of formalize the way we do innovation.
Yeah.
To encourage that cross-functional collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, a champion at your exco or on your board, or someone who's really pushing for innovation, as you see, to make it important, to keep it important.
Yeah. So very, very valid points, and would just like to summarize what you said. So you said that we shouldn't start the bigger project at one go, right? We should start in chunks, maybe all small portions. We should take care of the team collaboration, team planning, and especially how the team looks like, right? We need to have better set of architects and designers and whatever is required. So leaders need to take care of all of that, and cross collaboration, right? Which is again very important, like how you mentioned that if it is drifting apart from the central core vision, then it is going to lose the actual vision and the project may not even scale. And I have a very interesting fact and figure from McKinsey report that says that only 10% of the innovation projects ever go live or ever scale actually to the live or production environment, or so the initiatives which are being taken, and most of them are stuck in pilot purgatory, so a phase where the experiments never make it to enterprise deployment. So I think this is the fact we have seen in a lot of other organizations as well, that vision of the leaders need to be very clear. If it is not, then the scaling also becomes very difficult. So from your experience, do you have you have worked in different industries as well, right? So from your experience, if you can share a couple of examples where you have helped team scale successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple. An interesting one, I think, which maybe is a little bit different, is when I was working as a CTO of this NGO. I was based in Ethiopia. Sorry, and I was responsible for a lot of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And we were a pretty small NGO, but we ended up getting a large contract. And before that, it was kind of like we were working with a lot of schools, and it was pretty nicely, very relaxed and kind of like, okay, we're just doing this, for the kids or for whatever. I mean, the people who work there, maybe some of them are going to watch this. I don't know. Maybe not. No, they're all very professional. And I think all of us had, skin in the game and a lot of experience. But yeah, getting a large contract where we had to scale to, in one case, a few hundred schools in Kenya, and then another one, a few hundred schools in Tanzania. And we had to install satellite internet. This is like pre-Starlink. This when it was hard to do that. And a bunch of other resources and content filters and all. We had to start taking it very seriously. And now we scaled it up very quickly, a matter of maybe 2 months to deploying these different schools, like in the middle of nowhere with backup power, and sometimes we had to build a computer lab. There wasn't even anything there. So I worked before for a large European distributor, a multi-billion-dollar distributor who ships nuts, bolts, chemicals all over the world. And I'd learned a lot about logistics and a lot about, scale in that job. And I just applied the same thing there. And yeah, I mean, we successfully scaled it. We completed the project on budget and not without challenges. And there's a lot of challenges when you're working in those environments. Yeah, the same rules apply, basically. The same rules of scaling. And, you have to plan. You have to get buy-in from everyone. And, one of those, I guess, when the stakes are quite high, everybody's bought in and everybody's already culturally aligned with your mission, which in this case, it's kind of like comes with the territory. But I think it shows that with limited resources, if everyone's aligned, you can scale, these innovative things.
Yeah. And I think scaling any innovation, it requires some kind of standard process, right? You might need to follow some frameworks, some rules, some protocols. So from your personal playbook, do you have any important key points or recommendations which leaders can follow and just check and then proceed for their innovation scaling?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm not sure I had the blueprint or I followed the blueprint exactly. It's more following the vibe. And then these days, right? And it's been like give people space and encouragement and not too much pressure. Well, I think you have to give just the right amount of pressure or nothing happens. But if you give too much, it discourages the creativity and kind of the open, just kind of open path to just explore. And we've had something like that recently where we had an internal project, and it's gone quite well, better than I could have hoped without a lot of structure. But I think that's mainly accidental. I think because everyone was very, very excited about doing this project, and it just kind of happened without. It slowly started to form, and then we started to put rails on it. But I think my way of doing it is much different, and now I've kind of started to realize that this needs structure, and it needs a filter to get the right ideas, enablement, so a course on human-centered design, or whatever it is, and running these innovations through a design cycle, and getting these. Earlier we were talking about there's cross-functional teams, building cross-functional teams out of interest. And this is like, there's companies that do things like this, like Reactor in Finland and like Supercell also in Finland, but they're like self-organized teams around a problem or around a product. So we're experimenting with that now, just starting to, we will be formalizing it at Vera in the coming months. So some sort of like, I don't know, call it academy or something, but like a 6-12 week, structured thing where people have a few hours and there's an actual, curriculum. So that's how we're thinking about it now, to kind of let these best ideas float to the top and really support them. So it's not just like everybody go off and do something cool. I mean, there's space for that. Obviously, it's been very successful for large companies like Google and else doing the 10% or 20% of your time on a personal project. We are obviously much smaller, so that's not practical for us. But to give everyone an opportunity to participate and bring their ideas, and best idea wins. That's kind of how we're thinking about it moving forward.
Yeah, I think that brings back me to the point where you have mentioned earlier that planning is also one of the key pointers, right? Which you recommend leaders to start any project. So I think this also comes under planning, where you're planning for the resources, where you're planning for each and every entity before actually starting any innovation or initiative or scaling any initiative to a larger scale. So, and now it is so difficult because the tech landscape is evolving almost every day, right? Every day, every moment, it is evolving exponentially. Like AI, cloud, automation, wherever you go, whichever industry you talk about, they are all talking about all of these automations and AI especially, which is kind of very much dominating. So how can today's tech leaders really stay ahead of disruption? And in the market, there is a lot of noise as well, unwanted noise, right? People are getting kind of peer pressure, and leaders are initiating some kind of POCs, use cases, and initiatives which might not be even needed for them. So how can tech leaders stay ahead of disruption instead of getting victims of it?
Yeah, so this is something we have to kind of check ourselves against our ethos as a company. That's been a good measure for us, is to say, like, what are we here for, and who do we serve, and how do we best serve them? And I think the luxury of being in the nonprofit sectors is they're sometimes, not always, slow adopters, a little bit of laggards as they go, but just more careful. I think it's by necessity, because the way tech IT budgets are allocated are generally like a tranche or amount, so you can do limited things with it. So you have to be very careful with your technology purchases. So we've had to kind of take the same, measured approach, where we've done a lot of internal experimentation, and we've learned a lot. We didn't jump in early. We jumped into experimentation very early, and with AI specifically, and we decided to wait and do our own internal experiments to kind of measure the value and our capability, build our capability, and also measure our capability with our current team, and like have to every time say, okay, should we do this? Well, it's easy for us. We go back to our core mission. Does this align with it? No. And then kind of being a little bit skeptical about, the hype, marketing, and really digging into, environmental impact. And I think that the other things we kind of not have to do, but we say we are as a B corporation and as a social enterprise, that those things are more important than missing out, And I think within the company, there was a lot of, and still, and I'm not saying this negatively but a lot of excitement, following the trends and following in a fear of missing out. Okay, yeah. All the other tech companies are doing this. We're a tech company, right? When are we going to do this? Like, well, we're taking our time. We're being more measured. We're experimenting, so we really understand what's needed, and what we can offer. And I think that's where we are now. We're seeing, and maybe we discuss this later, but like with the trends, I think we have been very adamant. I've been very adamant that we're not going to implement anything we don't understand, and we're going to actually have to come up with a process to measure the business value of these things. And we're looking at it as any other automation, not a thing called AI, because there's no thing called AI. Just a very advanced, automation framework, whatever you want to call it. Like, I think not anthropomorphizing AI helps a lot. and just understanding that there's no being, there that's going to do this stuff for us. We have to build it. We have to decide to build it, and we only build it if it's needed. So just building a mindset, just like when I was doing solution architecture or technical architecture, just pushing back on any automations. If we don't want to scale bad decisions. So being able to really critically look at these requests and look at these, use cases and say, do you really need this? Is it, can't you just go to, this place or Google, do you really need to go to a chatbot to ask for a cake recipe? You can just Google. It uses a lot less compute just to go to Google and search for it. But there are valid use cases. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're still exploring them. We're starting to offer Agentforce services and excited about it, right? There's a lot of possibilities, but it has to still fall within, our ethos. And what I mean by like the transparency of the different models, the training data, environmental impact, inherent bias in these things that we can't measure when we can't look inside the tools. But unfortunately, when you have to wait, right? Because the tools are not, you go side by side. OpenAI and an API key is a lot more powerful than spending months and months building something, right? You have to see why we're building it. And I think it's just starting to shift now. We kind of bet that was going to happen, that open source models and open source ethos and all these kind of things are going to start to matter more in the coming years. And that's starting to happen a little bit, I think, with DeepSeek and some of the other things.
That was what I was about to say. Yeah.
So which is really exciting. I was telling, just wait, open source will win. And I'm an old school open source guy way back in the day, but I've worked out a lot of, but yeah, open source wins in the end. And I think time has shown that. Yeah, it's when I was part of the SCO Unix and Linux lawsuits back in the day. We were a SCO reseller, and then went to Red Hat. And anyway. So I've seen that kind of play out where Microsoft was the enemy, and now Microsoft, is a huge proponent of open source for whatever reason, whether it's commercial or otherwise. There's still, it's still one in the end. So yeah. Anyway, that's really exciting, and that stuff. Now we're seeing where I think it's going to become more accessible, but we're experimenting now with bring your own language model on Agentforce and being able to surface your own language models in.
Yeah. I think with the DeepSeek R1 model, which has been announced, I think last week or so. So it has really democratized AI, right? Now, even the small players can compete the giants like OpenAI and all the others, Meta and all of that. So I think that is really good that it is open source, which is again very important, like how you highlighted. It should be open. And again, going back to your previous statement, I completely agree that AI is the hottest topic in tech, and it's a mix of hype and reality, right? And then leaders need to really understand where it is hype and where it is reality for them, and what use cases they can build and what use cases they cannot. And so what is the most fascinating industry use case you can see? I mean, you might not be working on those use cases, but around you, what is the most fascinating use case you are seeing, which is using AI and automation, and it is creating a lot of impact? Your life sciences or healthcare or any industry.
I think from my out of my own personal interest and history and geography, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening now, it's becoming more possible to reach that last mile with edge compute and with on device. So I think that's really exciting, and that's also something we're like, okay, that's got to happen eventually, because as on the African continent, just like they leapfrogged with cellular technology very early, right, out of necessity, not out of like some strategic plan. So I think that, or maybe there was a strategic plan, but who knows? Not people weren't deciding, but I think the things coming out of there, like the ability that to think about like a farmer in the middle of nowhere, and these things are happening now. Get crop advice or take pictures of plants to detect certain types of blight. And
I have that app as well. I downloaded that app, and it's I do not remember the name of that app. I did that like last year or so, and you just click the picture of the plant and it'll tell you what plant is that and if it is healthy or not, and what kind of soil or fertilizer or food you should give to that plant to grow well. It'll tell the age and all of that. I mean, complete history. So it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really amazing, and like a lot of the innovations that are just coming out of that, I'm excited for those to happen, and I'm observing some of them now with my other research, like some of these really unique use cases, like around health, and but there's also an argument, and I'm again on the fence of walking both sides, and I'm being careful about how I talk about these things, part of my research and then my work. So there's also an argument that like, and I probably believe this as well, but a lot of this innovation you're seeing with, especially in the social sector around AI, has to do with chatbots and with, you can ask a chatbot anything and the chatbot will help you in this whatever context, a nurse or a therapist or a teacher or whatever. I get why there's a push to do that because there's a need, and this seems like an easy way to scale those type of things. But I think that I'm skeptical about those kind of use cases, and partially because can it do some of the things like Conmigo and Khan Academy and all these different kind of things to scale AI in education, and teachers are still there, teachers are still needed, humans are still there, humans love to teach. Nurses want to be nurses. And can they adapt AI to some of their work? Yeah, sure, but I think often it's seen as like, oh, okay, well, comes back to this, when Facebook was doing Facebook Zero way back in the day, and they had launched it in India and in a few countries in Africa, and it had a lot of pushback, and it was like poor internet for poor people, right? And I think that's one of the skeptical views I have, is like it's a poor version of the human equivalent that the people who are creating these things often aren't going to give them to their own kids or use them themselves. So we have to be kind of careful of trying to replace everything, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valid point, because even if you ask me as a person, right, that if I'm not well, if I have to go to a therapist or a doctor, I would prefer a real doctor. I'll prefer a human doctor or therapist who can come and talk to me and not an AI, right? So sometimes we really need to think that wherever we have our emotions involved, and I mean, the perspective may be different, but this is my perspective. Wherever human emotions and human interventions are required, we must have people alongside. And AI work, should be handed over and automated. What I'm trying to say is the work, like on paper work, which we are doing, right? The help desk or the service desk, where there are a lot of manual work, where there are a lot of documentation, all of those work can still be automated and can still be given to AI for enhancements and all of that. But wherever it is human intervention, some emotions and all of those are required, I think we still need people around and not AI to accomplish that. So that's very personal. That is what my opinion is.
Yeah, there's definitely a use case to lighten the administrative workload of people so they can focus on what matters, like the administrative workload of doctors, nurses, whatever. And they can focus on patients, right? That's an enabler for them to have more impact in their work and to do better work. But just to drop in replacement of, these kind of like these benchmarks are like every day, like leaderboard. It's like I was never into like too into sports and like following the scores or like the World Cup or anything. I don't pay any attention. So this is like the same thing now. This is at the top of the leaderboard. It did pass the MCAT or pass the the same performance of HD whatever. I think we'll see more when some of these new reasoning models are applied to these open models as they start to exist. Yeah, but I think I won't go as far as say a race to the bottom, but in some cases, yeah, it's like, what's the point? I get it as a general benchmark, but I'm just not buying that, being really good at this test means you're going to be good in this role.
You mentioned that you have 25 years of experience, right, in this IT industry. So what are the most valuable leadership lessons you have learned so far? Pushback, is it the one you just stated at the beginning? So I think
one of the best things I've learned, and this is something I convey to my team, and I don't know if it's something I was taught, it's just something I kind of figured out over time, is something I mentioned earlier, is like, as technologists, and you often lean into that and in your interactions with, especially in management, because you want, maybe it's subconscious, but you want them to be like impressed with, how well you can talk about technology. And I think that's at stake. Yeah. And I think leaning out of that and figuring out how to communicate and straddle both worlds is kind of the best thing I've learned. And I'm still not great at it. I still fall into my comfort zone, which is, just blabbing endlessly about technology until people are like, whoa, like, all right, like slow. So I think that's learning how to communicate technical ideas to management, however you learn to do that, whether having analogies on standby or learning to draw on a whiteboard really well, just basically communication, being able to communicate across different functions, and also learning about those functions. I've been lucky to work in a lot of different roles. So I've worked supporting sales, I've worked supporting finance, I've worked supporting distribution, warehousing, all those things. So I get a good view of like how they actually operate. So get in there. Don't sit in the office. Go and see the different functional roles. Sit with people, talk to them about their jobs, and really understand their motivations and the reason their role exists. I think also building diverse teams. I mean, I think one of the best decisions I've made, and it wasn't really, it just kind of happened naturally, is to take myself out of it, and then and to become more. I find myself more in a servant leader role, because part of that's the ethos of our organization, but in other organizations as well, because I didn't find myself too comfortable in the other role. It didn't work for me. It didn't come naturally. But just finding your leadership style, I guess, and mine is more soft, and trying to just grow people. So understanding what I don't know and what I can't learn, or maybe I could, but I shouldn't, and finding people and trusting them to do it. And look, everybody makes mistakes, and also being kind of, open to people making mistakes and learning, and, trying to find a place where you're not, also early in my career, I had a lot of bosses who shouted at me, and it was not a good, toxic working environment, and trying my hardest not to duplicate that, and I think I've been pretty successful there. But
yeah, that's very, very well said. I mean, whatever you have mentioned, it is pointing towards having a great team, right? And lifting people up so that they can also grow along with you. That is so important. And in this rat race world, I would say it is so important to lift others and make them confident, like how you are. It is absolutely a need. And yeah, I mean, thank you so much for all the points. And last question, what is the one advice you would give to the future tech leaders?
Yeah, stay curious. And I think my own journey has been about continuously learning and adapting, and knowing, what to learn, when to be there, and kind of keeping my eyes pretty far ahead, and kind of at least position myself to be ready for that thing when it happens, without diving fully into it. And always trying to find that balance between, your vision and the practical steps you need to take to get there. That's the challenge, right? Not going too far into the clouds without, thinking about long-term effects and the practical aspects of it.
Great. So be curious and keep learning.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Aseidas, for giving such insightful knowledge and sharing all your experience with me. And I'm pretty sure our guests and audience and viewers will definitely going to like this episode.